Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Good evening. If you have been out of school for a while, it's a safe bet that you haven't spent much time lately thinking about textbooks. But for a growing number of Americans, thinking about textbooks, thinking about how they're selected and what they contain, has become a major issue, a major education issue. And it's an issue with many elements. There is something called secular humanism. Some fundamentalists call it a religion and say it is actively being taught in the public schools. There is the political and professional power of the National Education Association and its Idaho affiliate, the IEA, and what some see as that group's clout in determining the kinds of textbooks that are used in public schools. And there is the old debate over the teaching of evolution as opposed to the teaching of the creationist theory. Tonight we'll step into this debate over textbooks and humanism, and we'll begin with producer Bruce Reichert's background report on the books and in Idaho what they contain.
The changes in gene pools and the frequency of a gene amongst an organism is mating preference.
These students might be surprised to learn that their school textbooks are considered controversial. They'd sooner believe dull and boring. Nevertheless, the content of school textbooks and the way those books are chosen has become a rallying point for some groups who want to end what they call a lack of balance in the classroom.
I guess the thing that really bothers me is that we just are totally out of balance in teaching our children, and they have no option.
The problem, according to Representative Bob Forey, is not just an Idaho problem, and it's not just with textbooks. And a quick look at some of the books that have been censored nationwide indicates that there are others who feel as Forey does.
Here's a woman with piles of dishes and their value of a homemaker that just isn't what it ought to be. Here's a couple of workers, some women that are working, very unhappy looking, a man that's left with a baby, a child left alone looking at a TV. Here's a married couple that are unhappy with each other, and everything is sad and drab. A man and his son, that very drab background, both very unhappy. We don't see happiness until we turn to a page, and it says, wholesome, reasonably priced daycare is available for many working mothers today. I don't think our school system and our people are really supporting the family.
Idaho is one of 22 centralized adoption states. That means a state selection committee first comes up with a list of suitable textbooks, and local school districts then choose from this list.
The state works with a 5-year adoption cycle. There's one subject area, basically one large subject area adopted each year. That process is repeated then after 5 years of it.
Baldwin sits on that selection committee, but he admits that large states like Texas really decide what Idaho students will read.
The Texas adoption probably influences not only the schedule of what is being published, but possibly the content of the material.
Later this month, the committee will begin evaluating science textbooks, and it's these books, particularly the biology books, that have come under heavy fire.
Under scientific creationism, one of their new business items, the NEA will oppose efforts that would have science curricula in the public schools which include teaching scientific creationism on an equal basis with evolution. So now we see the real censors coming forth, and I've looked through the books in the state library here on the approved book list. I found 7 books, and I chose a variety of them to show that it wasn't just one, but the theme is throughout the books in this library available to our teachers for our public school children. And every one of them speak and teach of evolution. That is the only way that things came about. There is nothing whatsoever about creationism. So that's the tie-in with the NEA. They are indeed setting the national agenda as far as what we teach in our public schools.
Forey wants creationism taught alongside evolution, even though the courts have consistently ruled against that idea.
Well, the courts have said a lot of things that we're still, the courts have declared, the Supreme Court has declared secular humanism as a religion. And yet our schools are full of secular humanism, the teaching of it. One of those tenets of secular humanism is evolution. So you teach that, and you're teaching it as a religion.
Ironically, creationists have been using one of the major tenets of evolutionary theory, that of natural selection. They're putting pressure on textbook publishers, who in turn are coming up with high school textbooks better adapted to dealing with their criticism. For example, the 1968 edition of this biology textbook had more than 22,000 words devoted to evolutionary theory. The 1981 edition, fewer than 5,000 words. And this 1981 textbook, Experiences in Biology, doesn't even mention the word evolution in its entire text. Now, some are calling this the purifying of America, but others are calling it the dumbing of America.
It certainly does bother me because evolution is one of those ideas that's extremely useful, in fact, absolutely necessary to test new findings against. The new findings about the DNA molecule, how the series of proteins and so forth are virtually the same in all living things, is something that you have to check against the theory of evolution. And if it's not there, students really don't have a grasp of what you're talking about.
Kay is a science consultant for the Department of Education. He says critics like Forey have put the fear of the Lord in publishers who don't want to lose their lucrative markets.
The editorial staff sits around and decides what will be acceptable and what will not be acceptable to their large markets. And so some of the material that really should be included in a textbook is often left out because certain mass markets won't approve.
And what about the teachers who use the textbooks and the students who must read them?
I don't know why anyone would be opposed to what is in our textbooks, or what, and since I follow what is in our textbooks, I can't foresee anyone objecting to what is there. It doesn't cross, I think, against anyone's religious beliefs or their feelings of creationism, or that there is a God, or that God created everything.
She hasn't told us anything that would go against the beliefs, but she's taught us things that leave us to think about it, you know, give us a chance to figure out what we like instead of what everyone else says is right.
But at school, it's left up to you. You know, you can decide for yourself. Mrs. Thompson doesn't go in depth on either one, really. She does talk about how different species among themselves can evolve, but it's not anything really big. We do just talk about it just so that we can understand it better for ourselves.
But we want to be sure that nothing goes against the parents' feelings, that we're not going to change their child's feelings about anything. It might strengthen their feelings because now they know what they are going against, if there is going against. But again, there's nothing to be against here, the way we are teaching it.
But the content of our school's textbooks and the way they are chosen has become, for Forey at least, a campaign issue.
Very seldom a day goes by that I'm not asked questions about these very things. What's going on in our schools? What kind of a stand do you take? My child brought this home, and they're concerned about these things.
Our look at this controversial issue continues now with Leah Koash. Mrs. Koash is the founder of a group called the Christian Coalition Association. Mrs. Koash, who is from Cascade, Idaho, has long fought what she considers to be the teaching of secular humanism in Idaho public schools. What are your specific complaints about the textbooks that are being used in Idaho schools?
Well, we have been studying them for 6 years now. This is our 6th year. And we do find that there are humanistic teachings in various subjects, not just as they mention here, evolution. We find it in history books, sociology books, psychiatry, and many, many more, which do teach the values of the humanist religion. We have not met with too many people who have disagreed that it is contained in these books. We have a letter from the professor of Moscow that says, yes, we do teach the humanistic values in our textbooks. So therefore, we contend that it is a religion, it has no place in our textbooks and should be removed. And also, we feel that we are supported by our stand by the Supreme Court when Justice Black ruled that legislatures of any state have the sole power to take out any subject that is emotional or controversial, and we think that this truly is. And there are several tenets, not just evolution, that we are against.
Let me just interrupt for a moment to ask you what you consider to be humanism.
Humanism, we're not talking about humanitarianism. We're talking about the religion of humanism that came from the European countries. It goes back as far in the biblical days as your Sadducees. We're talking about the Humanist Manifesto that is printed, was brought in here in 1943. There's a later one that has been printed since then by Dr. Kurtz. And this is what we're talking about. They lay down their tenets the same as the Christian lays down his commandments and his absolutes. And this is what we are contending is in the schools, and we feel that it's very discriminatory. We're not being equally treated under the law.
And in your view, what's wrong with it is not necessarily what it teaches, but the fact that you consider it a religion that is being...
Yes, it is a religion, and it is contradictory to the Christian and many other religions. And of course, this is where we go to our Supreme Court. They themselves state that you can either have neutralization or elimination. And elimination of a subject comes in when they can see that it is contradictory to another religious belief. And this is what we say. There are many more. There are the morals that are being brought in, as well as the evolution.
Can you give me just a specific example of some particular tenet of this teaching that you find particularly objectionable?
Well, yes, I not only object to this evolution because I find they have no grounds at all. When we have scientists such as Colin Patterson now coming out, and who's been an evolution writer for 20 years and is the head of the English Museum of Natural History, saying evolution is no longer his stand, and that he doesn't believe that it should be in the textbooks. But I feel that not only that, but the thing that really upsets me most is the fact that they are breaking down the family. Now, in the sociology book, you will find where they tell the child homosexuality is no longer considered wrong. Now, whose values are we teaching here? Also, they say that the family is no longer the center of the child's home. The home is no longer the center of his life, I should say. And we feel that this kind of teachings is breaking down the family, the morals, and this is hitting home to every parent that's out there.
Let me just ask you for a quick response, and I promise we'll come back to that subject. Do you have problems with the way textbooks are selected in this state, obviously?
We've had problems, yes, and we have a bill, and this is why we're at it again. We have a bill that would allow a third of the members of the committee to be parents who are not educators. We ran into a little objection to that on the State Board of Education before, with the idea that there would be people that were not competent. But I would like to remind the board that they would be the ones that would be appointing them.
Sure.
So if they're not competent, it's their own fault.
We'll come back. Thank you. Another view now from a teacher and a former official with the State Department of Education. Doreen Zorinsky teaches English now at Boise State University. She used to be a consultant on English and language arts to the State Department of Education, and she is currently the president-elect of the Idaho Teachers of English. Ms. Zorinsky, do we first off have a good, balanced method of selecting textbooks in this state?
Yes, I think we have a rational, workable system.
You heard Mrs. Koash say that we needed more parents involved in the process. Do you agree with that?
I think it wouldn't be harmful for parents to be involved in the process. There are places for parents to be involved right now. For one thing, many of the members of the textbook committee are parents, as well as being professionals. In addition, the state committee screens books that might be useful in a variety of settings in Idaho schools, and from that list, local school districts make their own selections, and so local school districts do involve parents very frequently.
There's a reasonably lengthy list of possibilities presented to any local school board in the state.
Yes, for every subject.
You heard Mrs. Koash's concerns about secular humanism being taught. You have a thought on that?
Well, I do. I think there's a real confusion between a religious group called secular humanists that existed in the 30s, and with capital letters, and the group of people who teach in the humanities with a small h. The humanities subjects are English, history, philosophy. And I feel that those two things are being confused here.
Is she reading more into what is in these textbooks than she should?
I think so, yes.
In what way?
I think that textbooks try to do a good job of dealing with the subjects at hand. And the interpretation of material is something that takes place by the reader.
You heard both Representative Forey on the videotape and Mrs. Koash allude to an anti-family attitude that's contained in some of these books. Do you see that?
I don't think there's an anti-family attitude. I think there's a fairly accurate representation of the variety of family life we see in America today.
What about homosexuality and in dealing with those admittedly controversial subjects?
I'm not aware of homosexuality being dealt with in any of the textbooks that are on the Idaho State adopted list. But again, it's a fact of life, and it would not be harmful for that to appear in textbooks.
Finally, let me ask you, and then we'll go back to Mrs. Koash for just a moment. Are you at all concerned about as some are apparently, about the material that is being left out of textbooks, because there is great debate about what should be in textbooks? Bruce Reichert pointing out in his video piece that led off the program that there are biology books that don't mention evolution. Does that concern you?
Yeah, it concerns me a great deal. I think there's some censorship of materials going on without fair discussion of the issues. It concerns me that publishers take material out in fear that it might be controversial. What it means is that students aren't having access to information. They aren't having access to material that they deserve to have access to. I appreciated the comments of the students from Capitol High School who said that the teacher dealt with the material and they were left to draw some of their own conclusions. I think that's what it means to be a student, to deal with material from a variety of points of view and to try to make some sense out of it in terms of their own religious traditions, if you will, their own values. I think that's what we're trying to do in schools with young people.
Well, let me just go back to Mrs. Koash briefly on that point. Isn't that what education is all about? Present the kids with many different views and let them decide where the truth is?
I agree, but what she left out is they have no other alternative. The other side is not presented. I have just gone through the science books, and creation is not brought in, and only the evolution is brought in, and science is supposed to be something that a child can observe, can prove, and can study. There is not a single bit of evidence to evolution. And many, many scientists, as this Colin Patterson that I just referred to a while ago, says that evolution as well as creation should not be in the textbooks. He felt that they both had to have faith. So therefore, I am saying that they have no alternatives on a lot of these subjects, and especially the moral issues. When we read where the family...
Let me just interrupt you and go back to Dr. Drzezinski here.
Well, I'm not a scientist, but I don't know what is meant by creationism. I think that the notion that it's wrong for schools to be secular is kind of crazy. I think we believe in our country in the separation of church and state. And the school should be secular. It should not deal with religious issues. And as I understand what Mrs. Koash is talking about in creationism, it's the biblical view of creation. And I think students are given that in their homes and in their churches, in their religious upbringing. This view of creation is part of their culture, their own tradition. And I don't see that as being in conflict with what the schools are teaching.
Mrs. Koash?
All right, evolution is also a part of a religion, their belief too, and they have no proof on it. In fact, the creation scientist has more scientific proof than what your evolutionists have. In fact, I have a letter here from a great scientist that says we have no transfiguration or gradualism of what they're putting out in evolution. There is nothing there. They are going by faith. It is a part of a religion, the same as the creation is part of a religion. But our Supreme Court also ruled that the Bible and the religions can be brought in if they're taught about, not of, if it is used as a secular subject in a neutral manner. But right now, any time that a Bible has been found in the schools, particularly in our own area where we have found the Bibles have been thrown out into the trash can. You talk about censorship, that's censoring. When the Supreme Court has already ruled that it can be brought in as a neutral topic.
Let me just get a final comment and then we'll move along.
Final comment. No school in Idaho has ever thrown a Bible in the trash.
Oh, yes, they have. And I can certainly verify that and document it, whatever you'd like. I'll be glad to.
Well, where did it happen?
It's in McCall School.
In what circumstance?
They were thrown out of the library into the trash can.
Okay.
If I may, I think that the schools do a good job in saying that there is this biblical view of creation and that it's part of people's belief system. And in no way do they teach that a scientific view of evolution is in conflict with that biblical view.
We'll come back. Thank you. Our final view of this tonight comes from a former teacher who is also an Idaho state legislator. Linda Dewey is a member of the Idaho House Education Committee, a former president of the Idaho Education Association. Representative Dewey joins us tonight in Pocatello. How do you, what you've just heard, how do you feel about it as a former teacher and a legislator who deals with education matters, Representative Dewey?
Well, I'll just put it in this context. I remember one time as I was teaching my 6th grade coursework on archaeology, and I had a parent call me that was concerned with what we were teaching, and she asked that we send home our book so that they could decide, the family could decide whether this was conflicting at all with what their religious beliefs were. And I immediately sent the book home. And what I had as the person came back to me was that they had no problem at all with what we were teaching. And I think that what we need to remember here is that most teachers have tried to present that evolution is a theory. It is not conflicting at all with creationism, and that value should be taught in the home.
I saw you quoted recently in the Idaho State Journal in Pocatello as saying that when teachers are attacked as secular humanists, what the real thrust of the attack is on the effectiveness of teachers.
Right. I believe that what's happening here is this central theme is the freedom to teach and to learn. How are we going to decide the sorts of things that children need to have so they can make decisions about their lives in the future? You know, the sorts of materials that they can use. So each of them make their own decisions, that we don't have a group of people who, unfortunately, I would say that they are much religious fanatics.
Would you put Mrs. Coash in that group?
Unfortunately, I don't like to call names, but I would put her in that category.
So this is as much a religious, political issue, if you will, as it is an education issue.
I really believe that it is.
Okay. You heard some of the criticism earlier from Representative Forey, among others, about the National Education Association and presumably the IEA as well, and how much clout supposedly the group has in determining the kinds of subjects that are taught in the textbooks that are used. Comment?
Well, I would comment that we have not the clout that they seem to have in Texas that seems to be doing all of the censoring of some of our textbooks. I would see very little clout really in that regard toward what NEA says or IEA says. We're not the ones going to the textbook committees. We're not the ones that are saying we won't buy your books if you don't delete certain items from the books.
And the people who are saying that are people who are concerned about secular humanism.
That's true.
Okay. Well, let me open it up on that point and go back to Mrs. Coash. You heard Representative Dewey say this is really a religious issue, is it?
No, and I'm very surprised that a representative would make such a statement. We have been traveling throughout this state, and many of the teachers that we have appeared before have asked and have really been concerned that the parents are not brought into the subject of textbook selections more than they are not interested in their children enough to get involved. And since we are now coming forth, a lot of us, we're going to be labeled as fanatics. I find that very, very unfortunate for anyone in the legislature to be making such a statement, especially when they make the laws, and we are under the Supreme Court law, which does, Judge Black, as I said, stated that it was up to the legislatures to take out those subjects that are emotional or controversial.
Well, let me just get Representative Dewey to respond to that.
Well, I would say to Mrs. Koash that one of the problems that I have seen with the criticism that we have of textbook committees or whatever we have is that it's obvious to me that there must be some groups that want a control of the schools. And then if you can't control those schools, then what are you going to do? Are you going to destroy what those schools are teaching? And in this way, I want to say, as I watched Representative Forey come into the Education Committee this year, of which I am a member, when he came into the committee, he talked to us about secular humanism. And his bill at that time, his answer to that problem was to get rid of compulsory education. So he brought a bill in, and if we couldn't get their viewpoint about secular humanism into the schools or remove that humanism from the schools, then their idea of how to take care of that problem was to get rid of compulsory education.
So this is in a way an attack on the public schools?
It seems to me that it is. It seems to me that school system should be free and open to all ideas. And that we...
Yes, I would like to make a statement here. I represent the Christian Coalition Association. We are not advocating against public schools at all. And where you got that idea, I do not know. I was a teacher, and I have very great concerns as to what is being taught, what has replaced those things that have, to my opinion, have been very valuable in making a good citizen, a child who can go out into the public and become employed. I find that situational ethics and some of these things that children are spending their time on, not learning to read, and so many other subjects that they could be, that there does need to be more involvement from the parents and to get this thing turned around. So
I'm rapidly running out of time. I want to go back to Professor Zirinsky here for a moment. On that point, are parents generally not as involved in the whole range of their children's education as they might be, taking textbooks as one example of where they sort of let themselves be taken along by whatever is being used?
My sense of Idaho schools is that parents are welcome. I think the Representative Dewey gave an example of what she did in her own classroom. That's typical of how teachers behave with regard to beliefs of students. I would say that schools are open to parents to visit. On the other hand, I think there is an issue of selection of materials by professionals that needs to be underscored too.
Well,
so
I'm afraid we'll have to continue this discussion another time. Representative Dewey and Pocatello, we appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you very much. Professor Zirinsky and Mrs. Koash, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.